Hello and welcome to another episode of All of Us Are Lost podcast. I am Kat and I am joined as ever by Andy as we delve into all of the mysteries of that island that formed the iconic TV show Lost. We're back 20 years later to go back, and this week we are discussing two episodes which I think really kind of ramp up the action on the island. What episodes are they, Andy?
So we are covering Raised by Another, which is the story of Claire and kind of her background, and All the Best Cowboys Have Daddy Issues, which is quite a Jack-heavy episode, but I think it also overall gives us a bit of picture of what's going on the island.
Yes, indeed. And I guess we should start with that first one, Raised by Another. Yeah, as you said, this kind of focuses on Claire. All we really know about Claire up until this point is that she is pregnant and she is traveling alone, and this kind of fills in those gaps whilst at the same time dealing with the fact on the island that she is very close to giving birth, and she has started having nightmares and she started sleepwalking, and all of her fears seem to be tied to her unborn child and somebody coming to get it. But is it dreaming? Is this all in her head, or is there something more to it?
Yeah, it's a really intriguing aspect of finding out with Claire, and obviously we also, through her flashbacks, we find out the beginning of her pregnancy, how she ended up on flight 815 through circumstance or potentially through the guiding hand of someone else. And yeah, it was good for her to finally get kind of put to the front, as we've seen her dotted about. We've seen her kind of talking with Charlie, and they've sort of sparked up a friendship as the shows went on. But because I think there seems to be a lot of the sort of heavy physical activity at the start of the show, with a lot of scavenging and a lot of building things and salvaging, she's basically been put to the back most of the time.
Yeah, she's kind of like, she did the memorial. That was her thing. She wanted to get the manifest and do the memorial for people. And she had a conversation with Kate about star signs. But yeah, she's very much kind of been somebody for Charlie to talk to, I guess, more than anything else. And it's quite nice to find out a bit about her, but it is only a bit. And I think it's a very universal story. Her story is, she's obviously young, she's got a boyfriend, they have an unplanned pregnancy. She isn't keen, but he convinces her that, yeah, this will be great, this will be amazing. And then we jump forward a few months and suddenly, like, oh, it's boring, we have to do this and we have to do that, and he's whining about, yeah, but when the baby comes I'm going to get pushed out more. And he turns around and says that he doesn't want to be with her anymore, which I think is something that a lot of women, particularly young mothers, can unfortunately identify with. And it's just, then it places Claire in this impossible situation because she doesn't have any money, she didn't necessarily want the baby, but it's too late for her to do anything outside of maybe giving the baby up. But her psychic is telling her that she can't do that.
Yeah, he seems convinced that she's the only person who's able to raise this baby. He, at first, when he's reading her palm, he's very apprehensive. He doesn't want to, but then it transpires that he's also been phoning her in the kind of the sort of second or third flashback. I think he's been calling her regularly, trying to get in contact with her, and trying to basically convince her that it has to be you. Almost. What he is pushing her to do is, we don't know yet. We don't get the full answers in this episode, but he's also manipulated her in a way that when there's an occasion where she does try to give the baby up, she's in a sort of courtroom procedure, and she tries to sign the baby over, and 3 different pens don't work, and there's all these sort of signs for her, so she opts just to leave that meeting there and goes back to the psychic. he then tells her that there's a couple in LA that are willing to pay her $12,000, $6,000 before she goes, and $6,000 when she gets there, and gives her a ticket for flight 815 or 815, however you say it personally. And it just feels like there is that element of, she mentions at one point on the island, as she's speaking with Charlie as well, he knew what he was doing. He put me on that flight because he said it had to be me that raised this child. Now, what we now know about people on the island, and that the plane crash survivors aren't alone, is he aware of them? Does he know about the likes of this week's baddie, or this week and next week's baddie, Ethan? Does he know of those people that are on there? Is he trying to push her towards them for the child, or is it just a whole other thing about, is it a special child? You know, you don't know the ins and outs just yet, but it's more questions.
He does know about the plane crash, and he deliberately sends her on this flight because she's going to survive this plane crash, and then she'll be there. It's just, I mean, that's, I kind of feel like, if you are a psychic and you do have these kind of powers, maybe use them for good, and maybe don't send people, because a lot of people in this plane die. There's only like 46 of them that end up surviving. So
Yeah.
to kind of willingly endanger this pregnant woman based on his powers, I think is a little bit wild. But I think when he first tells her, it's quite interesting that the wording that he uses is, he says like no other can raise your baby, which tying in with last week's episode Solitary, where Saeed met the French woman, and she told him, she revealed that there were others on the island. I thought it was an interesting choice of words. It's like, again, is that a hint that he does know about the others? No other can raise, or maybe now we're rewatching these so closely together, like we're drawing strings together a little bit too closely that we probably weren't supposed to, because we were supposed to have a couple of weeks gap in between these episodes.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing, actually. It could be that, dependent on the kind of strength of this guy's powers in terms of his psychic ability, like, he obviously knows the plane's going to crash. So does he know more about it feels like he maybe senses there's something there, but knows the plane's going to crash and senses there's something about potentially where they're going to crash, but he's not 100% sure, because he could have said to her, I suppose she wouldn't have bought the ticket, so now I'm getting myself tied up in knots because she was never going to leave. But it could have been like, no, don't go on that flight because it's going to crash, but you could live with your baby happily in Australia or something, like, if he wanted to prevent her from going on. But that would mean then she would have had to have got the flight, and that's a whole different thing. But it just adds to, with his sort of strange obsession, you wonder what is in store for Claire's baby. We know that now that she's, well, at the end of this episode anyway, there's a kind of confrontation with Ethan, who has been popping up sporadically, or not even really sporadically, slightly throughout this episode. A couple of scenes here and there. Locke's best hunting buddy. And he now seems to be a kind of major force going forward. Seems for evil, but again, we don't know his motivations overall. And I think the whole situation with Claire, it really it starts to bring a bit of an intrigue between Jack and Charlie as well. At the start, when Claire's discussing how she is getting attacked and someone's after her baby and someone was trying to put a needle in her, Jack's very dismissive and just says, no, it's through her pregnancy that she's experiencing this. There's hallucinations. She's probably malnourished and dehydrated, and he's very dismissive. And Charlie's just like, no, fuck you. There's more to this. Like, this isn't just some over the top reaction to a bad dream.
Yeah, no interest. No interest. The hysterical pregnant lady.
No.
I do enjoy that. The episode opens with one of Claire's dreams, and it's very kind of like Twin Peaksy. There's like a crib. in the forest. And I just think it's interesting that of all of the islanders that she can dream about and encounter, it's John Locke. And it's John Locke talking to her about that she should know where the baby is, and it's her responsibility. And I don't think we've really seen Claire and Locke interact, but it's just interesting that he is, kind of at the forefront of everybody's like subconscious, it seems.
Mm. Yeah, he seems to be the sort of manifestation of everyone's experience on the island, positive or negative. And I think her seeing him, she maybe sees him more as a guide than what the rest of the islanders and maybe the audience see Jack as. She's maybe her relationship with Jack isn't as kind of at the forefront, she's maybe witnessing it from a sort of outsider's perspective, and sees Locke as the one that's providing her with food and trying to find proper answers for the survivors. And having him there in that dream is a very interesting thing, because again he's very spiritual, and Claire also has her. She talks about star signs, and there's certainly a spiritual element to her. So it could be maybe an off-screen thing that we've not seen. Maybe they have developed a slight relationship through that, or again, are these nightmares? There is elements of obviously dreams and slight hallucinations that she's having, as well as probably a physical torment. But is this an island projection that we've seen? Because we know, or certainly think we know from what we've seen with certain episodes, we've had Jack's dad walking about on the island when he's dead. Is this another element of the island projecting onto her and wants her guided towards Locke?
Yeah, potentially. And then she then says that she's been attacked, like we said, with somebody's come after her with a needle. This alarms Hurley, who kind of realizes that, hang on a minute, like, we don't really know each other, and we've split off now. So there's like so many of us on the beach, there's so many here. We don't know who's here. Like, we need to do something about this. So he tasks himself with trying to find a little bit more out about the islanders. So he goes around and he's sort of asking everybody, their name and occupation. And I enjoy the interaction with Hurley and Locke, who just creeps Hurley out so much that he just kind of backs away rather swiftly to the safety of Kate. And I think we also have, I think, the first time that Boone has done anything actually genuinely useful, and that's when he says to Hurley, well, why don't you just use the manifest and tick off the people from there? And that thing, it's he's always, I think we discussed before, he's got like golden retriever energy or something. He's so desperate to like please that he goes in and then just causes more of a mess. But in this instance, Boone's actually done something quite good, and then obviously Detective Hurley gets on the case.
And he also has to kind of confront Sawyer as well, and you get the feeling Sawyer maybe just feels a bit sorry for him, because he clearly sees that he's terrified talking to him. And yeah, that then leads us on to, so they've obviously got the 46 survivors, I think we're at now.
Yeah.
And maybe what it transpires is there's no one named Ethan, because he asks Ethan his name, Ethan Bond, I think his surname is.
Ethan
Rom, sorry. And yeah, finds that there's absolutely no one with that name on the manifest. And again, maybe this has been because Ethan's obviously with someone that's infiltrated them, and he seems, if he's able to do that, and he's able to do it to someone like Locke as well, you imagine he's very clever. Could he have read a manifest or found something? It feels like there would maybe be a way for him to try and find out who's been on the plane, if there ever was going to be something like that. But that's again maybe just overthinking his overall ability. If he's managed to survive on this island and he's wanting to infiltrate a group, would they have maybe tried in a bit more detail to blend in. If he's the way we've seen him, he's only been in patches, but it feels like for everyone else, he's maybe a bit more well known. Like he goes with lock hunting, he helps scavenge, build everything. But finding that out, this episode kind of all comes to a really fantastic conclusion where it's building, and you don't know, you know something's going to go wrong, because if the whole point in searching in the manifest, it was never going to be, oh yeah, everyone's on here. There's Ethan. Ethan's there. He's number 46, and there's
Claire's just hysterical.
Yeah. It's pretty much it. It's just on her head. She's just acting a wee bit funny. And it could be, it's not exactly going to be Walt. I mean, it could be. You never know. It could have been at the start, but just it's been pointing towards Ethan, and having that build up and that tension building up when Claire and Charlie are having their moment in the forest as well. You just, that's the dread that starts building. You know something's going to happen, and when Holly says that there's no Ethan on this manifest, or he doesn't. I can't remember if he actually uses those words, but basically it cuts to Charlie and Claire, and Ethan standing in front of them, just looking creepy as fuck. Like he just has a proper slasher vibe about him in that moment.
Yeah, it's a great sequence of scenes that do really sort of build up the tension, which I don't think we've really seen since that pilot episode where they're all waiting in the forest, and they can hear the whatever it is. And it is the juxtaposition of the scene. So Claire thinks she's going into labor. Charlie runs off to get help but doesn't want to leave Claire, finds Ethan, tells Ethan, oh, Claire's back there. But then he goes back to her because he sends Ethan off for Jack, and then interspersed with Hurley running up and saying there's somebody. Saeed comes back.
Yeah.
And Saeed is delirious. He's got an injured leg. He gets out, he's seen the French woman, and, we're not alone on the island. Hurley comes crashing in. There's somebody who's not on the manifesto. And then you've got Ethan, and you can sort of, because we haven't seen Claire and Ethan interact, there's something about the look that Claire gives Ethan where it's kind of like, obviously she's remembering, guess that's the guy who was coming at me with a needle. And then it stops. And, on the initial watch of this, that was it for a week. It was a week until you found out what happened. But, thankfully, in this day and age, you can just continue watching on Netflix or press next on the Blu-ray player.
Yeah. And I was thankful for that, because we will discuss going on to the next episode that I've ended up watching further on because of just that kind of sense of anticipation. I remember very clearly this episode actually from watching it, and that just the sort of heart-sinking moment when the episode's come to an end and you want to find out more, but you're not going to, but you just have that kind of hope that something else is going to happen. Maybe there's a 5 minutes extra they've just not told us about. Excuse me. But yeah, as you said, it's probably the biggest build-up of tension we've had since that earlier episode. And having Saeed come back as well, where we had left him just falling to bits, and he'd kind of mentally exhausted himself, but he was physically pretty done as well. It all just culminates and leads into what personally for me I think has been the strongest episode so far. What coming up next?
Yeah. Shall we get on to that one? I think we've set it up quite nicely, and just people who are kind of watching this series for the first time, just imagine that you've had to pause and wait 7 days to get to the beginning of this episode, which I think, again, considering that there's a week gap, this episode picks up immediately after the end of Raised by Another. It's literally, Hurley finishes his sentence that is cut off at the end of that previous episode. So if you've got to wait 7 days, I know they do like a previously on Lost, but that's still, you kind of lost some of that tension, and getting to watch it back to back, you're still very much in that, what? Who's this guy? What's he going to
Mm,
do with Claire?
yeah. And it's straight away into like an almost action tracking shot of
Mm.
Locke and Jack just making a beeline for the forest. They don't really know where they're going. They know they've got a certain point where Charlie and Claire are going to be, and then they find Claire's bag. So obviously Charlie and Claire have vanished somewhere. And this is where Locke's again coming into his own. Seems to know a good bit of the island. If it's he now knows it's Ethan, so maybe he has an understanding of him as well. If they
Mm.
have been spending a lot of time together, so yeah, they've basically it's a very action heavy episode. This, which I found really refreshing compared to a lot of the mysteries that had been built up. It was little bits dotted about, but maybe not a huge amount in terms of chases or fights. But this one is very action heavy, and it leans into the paranoia aspect of it, the chase and the hunt, and the hunted known that they are being followed, but there's such a split, and then again more splits starting to form in the group. We have Locke going back to fetch supplies, and Michael wants to help. They don't, obviously. I think the hatred between those two is like a one way street. Michael doesn't like Locke because his interaction with Walt,
Mm.
and Locke kind of knocking him to the side and saying, "Nah, I've got enough." Even though he does take Boone again, Boone trying to be helpful, he's just kind of done his thing,
Yeah.
and Kate as well. And it's yeah, it just everything's just ramping up per episode at the minute, and it's this one just takes it to a whole new level.
Yeah. What I really enjoy in that opening, like fluster of Hurley being like, it's Ethan. And then,
Mm,
Jack and Locke kind of look at each other and then they go, they're like, no, where could he go? And then Kate's just like, Saeed's leg. Saeed is, yeah. Jack was in the
aye,
middle of like bandaging him up before Hurley burst in, but they're so
aye,
focused on, we've got to find Claire, that poor old Saeed is just kind of left with his gaping leg wound
mm,
to deal with on his own. And yeah, we have had so many sort of like calmer episodes giving you a peek behind the scenes with the characters with maybe the odd like, oh, what's this? What's this thread? What's this? And it is nice, as you say, to get into a more action focused episode
mm,
again, a bit more movement and with the hunt through the trees and clues like Charlie's, potentially leaving, his plasters behind as a little
mm,
like clue for the trackers to follow and stuff. And yeah, this kind of resurgence of this, whatever beef it is between Michael and Locke. I do enjoy how uh, Locke's like, oh, you guys go south. You want to do it, go south. But I've got enough people with me. And then Michael calls him Mount Baldy. It's like,
yeah,
Mount Baldy is not the only one that can do something around here before
aye,
ditching his son to Hurley, and
mm,
then seemingly going off down south, but we don't see any of his journey, at least in this episode.
yeah,
So yeah, it's nice to see. And as you know, as much as we have been very derogatory towards Boone. He is a helper, and I feel like he is the person that is looking to be needed, and other people haven't really given him the time of day, whereas Locke is prepared to some degree to do that. And I think it's kind of what Boone needs. And as we've seen with Locke trying to help Charlie through his drug addiction, and
mm,
when Jack went on his walkabout, he was sort of there for him. He does have this cult leader sort of vibe to him. And I think in Boone, he's potentially found an actual loyal, genuine follower. So it's quite interesting to see the sort of the start of that dynamic between those two.
yeah, yeah. And when we get further into the hunt, then Jack and Kate split off because Kate's able to use. She has some sort of tracking ability, which Jack seems to know a wee. Well, Jack, we all know Jack knows a lot more about Kate than everyone else does, but Locke seems almost a wee bit shocked by it. He says, "Oh, you're more surprises every day," or so. Locke just gets stuck with Boone. So he's got to be. He's got to at least take him on. He's got to, I suppose, again, younger man with the older guy gives that bit of energy. Yeah, their relationship kind of does develop. Locke tells Boone to go back, which Boone just flat out refuses to do. Again, like the loyalty, as you're saying, the happy Labrador just tagging along for the adventure, gets to go a walk.
Yeah,
probably thinks a lot more of himself than what most of us would think, having watched it so far. But fair play to him. I think Locke's driving force in this, I think overall, while it is probably to help Charlie and Claire, again, I think he's still just tied in with the island and finding out more about it. And if he finds out there's other people on that island, that's just another aspect of it for him to dive into. Whereas with Jack, you have his guilt at not believing Claire initially, and he's driven by that sort of frustration and guilt, really, which leads into his flashbacks as well, seeing him confronting his dad over a botched surgery because his dad's been drinking before getting called in. He's on call doctor, but he still had a drink in him during the lunch. And Jack's had to take over and a patient's died. And the way that Jack seems driven by his past a bit more and what's happened, while Locke seems driven by finding out what's to come. They're very sort of diametrically opposed. We've seen it already so far, with a lot of the way they react, even with each other. They are a very strange interaction. And it's, those sort of developments of those two, again, becomes more intriguing.
Yeah, and I think that patient is also revealed to having been pregnant. So I guess that's why she's the one that is kind of in his mind. He's already kind of failed a pregnant woman in the past from his perspective. And here he is, repeating the same mistake almost. In not believing Claire. I mean, I don't feel like even believing Claire would have necessarily resulted in anything, because I think the timeline that Ethan has with Claire, I think, was initially supposed to be longer, but then when Hurley comes up with his little census thing and he's like, what's this for? He then realizes that his time is numbered. So I think he has to kind of put into action the end game of his plan earlier, which I think is why it's sort of clumsily done with him just capturing them. But it is,
it feels like that he's basically waiting for her to have the baby. I think that would have probably been his
the baby. Yeah,
it would be a lot easier to just run with a baby through the woods than it would have been with two grown adults. Well, two grown adults, one pregnant. And it's, as you said, Hurley just trying to be a bit. I think his whole thing was just finding out about each other as well, because he says, "My name's Hugo Reyes. Hurley's just a nickname. I'm not telling you why." And they just, he's basically just trying to be a good person again, almost acting like a conduit for the audience, finding out more about people, wanting to get involved in everyone's life, and that's what's sped up Ethan's endgame and led to a very messy and dangerous confrontation.
I think that the other aspect of Locke as well is I think he feels betrayed. He's not somebody that necessarily lets people in, and he has, obviously, Ethan's been his little buddy, and then to find out that he wasn't who he said, I think his pride is hurt a little bit, which I think is one of the reasons why he's so headstrong about forging through, because you've got these two men going in different directions in John and Jack. They're both exceptionally driven, but for different reasons. But something I do enjoy about the Boone and Locke dynamic is that Locke tells him the truth. A lot of people have tried to get information out of Locke, and he's been a closed book. He's refused to say anything. And Boone's like, what did you used to do? I'm guessing you're like a taxidermist or a hitman. And he says, no, I was like a regional sales manager at a box company. And
Mm-hmm.
Boone's like, yeah, whatever. But having seen Locke's story, we know that it's the truth. It's quite interesting that in whatever way he feels like he can trust Boone to
Mm.
just be honest. But then it's
Yeah.
so far removed from this image of him on the island that nobody believes him. It's almost like everything. If he said, "I was paralyzed when I turned up here, mate," they're like, "Yeah, whatever, look, yeah, good
Aye.
one." So it's quite interesting that he has told somebody the truth, but it's so foreign to them that they can't accept that Locke would ever do anything that boring.
Yeah. And Boone also opens up as well about what he does. He says he runs a wedding company, but it's really like sort of a
Mhm.
subsidiary of his mum who's massively successful. And we discussed it previously about him being a lifeguard as well, because it was mentioned
Mm.
by Shannon that he's a lifeguard, and we've seen he's not very good at swimming. So, as how much of a lifeguard was he? He says he runs a wedding company. It's clearly his mum that does it. So there is an element of, yes, the happy puppy, but also again, like Locke is, maybe this is what Locke sees in him. Locke's been trying to not prove himself to anybody but himself, but then he sees Boone maybe trying to prove himself to everyone, and sees an almost sort of kindred spirit in that, and maybe why he'd be willing to take him under his wing and lead him, and yeah, just have someone on side. Because I think even though Locke isn't particularly the thing with Locke, I think he's not liked or disliked by a huge group, like
Mm.
apart from Michael. There's factions already starting to show within them, being on the beach and being in the caves, by who they trust and who they don't. Locke's kind of just the middleman. Maybe if he was having Boone on side would be a good thing in terms of if there was ever a strain over the whole sort of camp.
Mm. And there's a great scene of foreshadowing. We're back in foreshadowing territory that obviously when you watch it the first time you don't think anything of, and then on a rewatch, there's this conversation. They're using strips of a red shirt to mark their trail so that they can find their way back and know where they've been. And Boone brings up the whole mythos of the red shirt in Star Trek, which were obviously, the disposable fodder that went out with the captain. And for those that haven't seen Lost before, without too many spoilers, let's just say that Boone doesn't make it along as far as others.
Mm.
But also there's the foreshadowing for J.J. Abrams, who would then go on to do the Star Trek films. It's like he's
Yeah.
sort of inserted this like little bit of like Star Trek like nerd lore just as a little like, just if anybody wants, to maybe make a new Star Trek film. Which I, kind of like looking back at, where his career's gone and then what happens with Boone, it's like it's always doing those little foreshadowing moments.
Mm. And Locke completely dismisses him as well. No, I don't watch that. Can't imagine
Yeah.
Locke watching Star Wars. He's very, it strikes me as a Western or survival programs or watching documentaries about plane crashes and things like that, and how people's probably Alive, Betty Alive is Locke's favourite movie. Now that would have been out then, wouldn't it? That was the early to mid 90s. Alive, wasn't it? 100%. He's got that on repeat. Like he's burnt a hole in that video. So Star Trek, just you can tell, just wouldn't fly with him really. But again, yeah, Boone mentioning that, and he is the tag along out of the four. The
Yeah.
other three are perfectly capable. Jack's got a level of capability at survival and island navigation and just general overall fitness that I didn't imagine a surgeon would have, but he seems to be holding his own not too bad, sprinting through there. Up till a point, obviously he tries to scramble up some sort of vinage and falls over, bangs his head, and then we get the proper bad guy moment from Ethan, where he, again, Jack, very physically capable, obviously not a fighter as such,
Mm.
just gets the shit kicked out of him by Ethan. and that was a proper. This is what I mean by that. When we were talking about the last episode, when he's confronting Claire and Charlie, he seemed like a slasher, and in that moment, he's maybe not the slasher, a slasher villain as such, but there's a physicality to him. There is speed about him. There's a speed of movement. And this is just me fanboying about something else, but it reminded me a bit of in Dark Knight Rises, where the first confrontation between Batman and Bane is just on a different level, and Batman's just a bit rusty, and it maybe feels as if Jack's had a bit of training, maybe does taekwondo or something, or boxing, but Ethan is just kind of ingrained in it and has been on this island for so long and has had such survival instincts, and he just absolutely flattens him.
And he says, "Stop following me or I'm going to kill one of them." And see, Jack does not listen. And then we get this really harrowing scene where Jack and Kate find Charlie hanging from a tree. And the sad lost music is playing in the background, and it's like, shit, have we lost like one of our favorite characters? Like 11 episodes in, is this what this show's going to be? Jack's trying to revive him and Kate's crying, and then there's this moment where Kate tells Jack to stop because Charlie is not responding, he is dead, and then the camera does a wide shot and you're expecting it to sort of like fade to black and cut to the next scene, and yes, Charlie's dead, but then the camera suddenly goes back in because Jack he's lost that patient, he has lost Claire, he is not going to lose Charlie, and he beats him back to life essentially. Just a few hard jabs on the old rib cage, and then suddenly Charlie is back from the dead.
It was interesting, and I don't think that there's anything done by accident in this, because for a few of the scenes, the way Charlie's head is sitting and the rope that's around him, it's almost like a halo right around his head. Like it goes from either side right round to the top, and then after a point, that branch kind of formation has moved, and I don't know if that was saying maybe he was dead and now he's back. So I just noticed it, and I thought it would be something interesting to bring up, because they have at this point got so many shots that mean something, like you've said, with foreshadowing, like you said, with there's symbolic things throughout the whole show so far, and there was just a couple of shots on the initial parts of Jack's CPR where it just looked like a complete halo around Charlie's head, and probably nothing. Again, this is what it does to you. It gets you thinking.
I don't know this, yeah, but I don't know if anything in this program is ever nothing, and so they then give up the hunt for Claire because they've got resurrected Charlie to deal with, and they go back, they go to the caves, and Shannon is worried that Boone isn't back yet, and then Kate again says that there's anyone on this island your brother is safe with, it's Locke, which again, that's not necessarily strictly true. And then we go back to those guys, and Locke is so in tune with the island that he knows when it's going to rain. And then it's like he's tolerated Boone until this point, but it's like, no, you're going to get wet, go back. And Boone kind of agrees at this point. I guess that's maybe like his sort of like rich boy spoiled upbringing. It's like, yeah, it's cool to go and be like an adventurer in the jungle while it's nice and sunny, but oh no, it's raining now, I'm going to go back. And in the handing over of the flashlight, which Locke says, you'll need this more than me, apparently Locke can see in the dark, the torch falls on the floor and clangs, and it hits something metallic, and they go to investigate, and we have a hatch in the island. New mystery unlocked.
Yeah, and it is again a great cliffhanger to kind of end on, because it's something man-made in this sort of natural environment, as well as finding out there is other people. They could be in there. They could be waiting. Maybe Ethan's in there for all we know. he could be in there
exactly.
with Claire.
That's what he's in Claire. Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
yeah, yeah, and it's going to be interesting to see where that goes, and trying not to preempt anything too much from having had the rewatch before. Not the rewatch, the initial watch. I think it's a good one to ramp everything up, and while it is action heavy, they still manage to get their little twist or little cliffhanger carrot dangling at the end of it. There was one thing I was wanting to touch on quickly actually, which was almost like a flippant scene between Hurley and Walt in this
Yeah.
episode as well, where Walt mentions that his dad, not Michael, his other dad Brian, has said that he's incredibly lucky. He's just got so much
Yes.
luck, and he is repeatedly beating Hurley at checkers again, something that Walt and Locke played at the start of the season. And that's something that, well, Walt's been quite a prominent figure, and seeing him interact again with someone else and he's obviously very inquisitive, he's a young boy, but he seems to win every single role while Hurley loses everyone. I think he says he owes him $20,000 or something like that. So another string to the bow of the show, I think.
Yeah, it is because it's not that it's like he'll say double sixes and then it's double sixes. It's like
Yeah.
that's really lucky. And then there's also the scene with Walt and Sawyer. We haven't really seen much of Sawyer in the last two episodes. Obviously, at the end
Mm,
of Solitary, he turned up to the golfing game and he was sort of like giving the view that maybe he was going to try and integrate himself a little bit more. But in the
mm,
last two episodes, we haven't necessarily seen him too much. He has this scene with Walt where like Walt basically fills him in on everything that's happening and tells him
yeah.
that Saeed is back, which then leads to this confrontation between Sawyer and Saeed. The last time these two were together, Saeed was essentially about to kill Sawyer. Um,
Yeah.
but it's interesting that Sawyer is the only one that's prepared to listen to what Saeed has got to say. Everybody else just went hurtling off for Claire and
Mm,
left Saeed. Nobody was there to listen to what has happened to him. So it's quite an interesting scene between who have been two rivals suddenly
mm,
maybe coming onto the same page with Sawyer being told about the French woman and the virus and the fact that she murdered everybody that she knew, and that there are others on the island. Saeed hasn't seen them, and neither has this woman, but she believes them to be there. So it's kind of like, is there now going to be sort of a thawing between these two now that they've almost killed each other previously?
yeah. And I think Sawyer from maybe even 3 or 4 episodes ago would have just stuck that knife in his side.
Yeah.
So you're seeing a definite character development in him, a softening of him, because I also don't think he would have even entertained Walt coming near him before. He would have just dismissed him, told him to go away, and having that moment between Sawyer and Saeed are two really strong characters, even for so early on in the show. And as you said, yeah, as I said, I think he definitely would have stabbed him before, but he also mentions, yeah, kept your signal light burning. So
Mm.
he clearly sees a value inside, as well as maybe not a hatred for him, but it's certainly a, a dislike and a racist attitude towards him. Still got that there.
Yeah, but it is nice to sort of see that the characters are sort of starting to develop a little bit more. The island is having an effect on more of them
Mm,
than just Locke. And yeah, but this is episode 11, so this is pretty much the halfway point of the season, and we've had a really action heavy. I mean, I guess this have been like the mid-season finale back in the day? Because that's obviously what they used to do, isn't it? They do like a run of
mm,
episodes and then they'd break for Christmas, and then like pick up again in like February or something. I do wonder if this, with the hatch being discovered, was that episode that then people had to wait a couple of months until they picked up, which
yeah.
seems likely, but also horribly, horribly cruel. Because I mean, oh no, over in the UK, we just kind of got it weekly because we got it slightly staggered after the US, so we didn't have to deal with that break. But it just seems really cruel to be like, what's this? Find out
See
in
you
two
again in
months'
2 months.
guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It certainly feels like a point that they would, because you've got Claire missing. You've just found out about. You've had an episode to kind of mull over Ethan. You've had the discovery of the hatch, and I think it's sort of like the way the shot pans. I'm sure at this point it would have been the cut off, and you can't imagine that being like, and then enjoy your Christmas, but we're taking a break. We've got some editing to do, so yeah, I can imagine that being that. Yeah, it definitely feels like a natural point for it. I may be wrong. Maybe we'll watch the next 2 episodes and there'll be one that's definitively there.
Yes, we'll do some reading in between recordings and find out when it did cruelly stop. But yeah, I think that's it for this week. Unless you have anything else that you want to add.
No, all good for me.
Cool. So I guess that leaves us, say thank you for joining us on this journey. Obviously, Christmas is coming up. If you've missed any of our previous episodes, now is the perfect opportunity to catch up and maybe start that full rewatch along with us. And if you want to get in touch with us, I can be found on Instagram and Letterboxd at Gizmo Shikari, or on Blue Sky at cathughes.bsky.social. And where can people find you, Andy?
You can find me on Blue Sky and Twitter at Nowhere Andy. And thanks again for joining us, and join us next time for episodes 12 and 13, which are Whatever the Case May Be and Hearts and Minds.